Pascal, thank you so much for coming on. It's an honor. It's an honor to be able to learn from you, to have you on this interview series with us, as always. And today, I just thought I would start off chronologically, um, from your inspirations, your beginnings. So, you're a Grammy award-winning composer and jazz pianist, and so I was wondering, on the piano side, from the beginning, did you always start with the jazz genre, or did you start with classical first and then switch?
I mean, I feel like when you start, it's kind of non-specific.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I definitely was playing Heart and Soul and listening to Bach's Toccata and Fugue and all the classical hits. And when I started studying piano, it was my first teacher was actually my next door neighbor who was a kid my age. And then I started taking lessons from an oboist who was a classical musician. And I guess it was classical, but at the beginning, when you're playing hot cross buns, like, is that classical?
Right,
You
right.
know,
True.
so I don't know. But I guess it was classical.
Okay, so was there like a point then where you really started to become more enamored or just more attracted to the jazz side? Like was there any moment where you had like a clear distinction between the two genres?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I used to avoid practicing by doing theory workbook stuff.
Uh-huh.
So I'd show up not having practice, but then I'd just go through the theory workbook in the car, and it was really easy for me for some reason. And so um, I was really into kind of the theory of music,
Mhm.
what what chords were, how melodies fit over chords, and things like that were kind of in my going on in my brain in the background all the time anyway.
Mhm.
And when I got exposed to jazz, that's kind of how it works. You're always kind of connected to the harmony, so you know what to improvise with.
Right.
And I was always terrible at sight reading too, so I wanted to change the notes. I wanted to memorize everything, and in the context of jazz, that was a lot more a part of the tradition of the music to memorize things and to change the notes and to you know uh, play around with the harmony and things like that. So I was really into that, and it was also fun because it was social. And I'm an identical twin, so I could play with my brother and with other people, and I really liked that too.
Hmm. That's wonderful. So then did you become interested in the composing side of things at around the same time you became more interested in jazz? Like you were saying with being able to change the harmonies and the notation.
Yeah, totally. I think I was always making things up. Um, and I didn't really think about it as jazz necessarily. I just,
Right. Okay.
making up combinations of things and trying to play things that I was listening to.
Hmm.
And
That's
I think that so I was always kind of composing, I guess, but I didn't really think of myself as a composer until I was an adult.
okay. So would you say that the improv side of things was pretty important in your early development as a musician?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and I think a lot of people mess around with improv and noodling and things like this, and they don't think of it as very serious, but it is a way of learning, and it's a part of what makes us musicians.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I think we've discussed a little bit about improv at Young Arts Week, actually, and I
Yeah.
think improv is sometimes thought about as something pretty unstructured and free. But you said before that improv can also sometimes have even more rules, sometimes in written music. So I was just wondering, how do you think about improv? What are these sort of rules, and how do you structure it when you do improvisation?
Well, I think any context that involves improvisation is going to be different, and it's kind of understanding what that context is kind of a big part of how you improvise successfully. And when I say successfully, I'm thinking about like, what are your goals when you improvise? Are you trying to connect with other people that you're playing with? Are you trying to make something that sounds good to an audience? Um, are you is there some personal goal like incorporating things you're practicing or expressing your bad day or your good day or something? And I think um, you know, when when I when I think about the context of of improvisation, oftentimes the biggest variable is the piece of music you're improvising over. And what are the rules to that piece of music? What are the building blocks that make it work? How can you fit into that in a thoughtful way and contribute something meaningful and something that elevates the music or the experience? Um, and it doesn't have to be playing, uh, hot licks over chord changes in a jazz context. I think there are a lot of um, contemporary classical musicians that engage with non-standard notation like graphic scores or a series of directions where you maybe pick an option from three options or maybe there's some element of randomness, like in John Cage's music where um, decisions are being made by throwing sticks or something.
Right, right.
I think of all of those things as improv adjacent. Um, it just depends on how you think about improvisation.
Hmm. Do you think of yourself primarily as a pianist, a composer, or a composer who plays piano, or something else?
I think I've always felt kind of claustrophobic by like the paths that,
Boxes. Yeah. Uh-huh.
we, try to follow. There are all of these, especially when we're young, these kind of career-driven titles and boxes that we feel obligated to follow, maybe different boxes for different people. Like our teacher wants to see us in this way, our parents want to see us in this way. We have maybe some guilty pleasure where we want to start a rock band in our garage and,
Hmm.
it's a side thing. I think I try to think as broadly as possible um, and about who I am so that I don't limit, what I'm doing. I think what's really important is to just feel authentic in the things you're doing and connect with people and sounds and everything. Because then you're whatever box you are, it's your box, and it's a
Right,
good one.
right, definitely. So I actually want to focus now on that part about the identity when you're composing and what sort of message you want to get out there. Because I know classical musicians, or maybe musicians in general even, they always want their music to say something, to convey some message to the audience. However, I don't think it's always very often that they make what exactly they're trying to communicate explicit to the audience or
Hmm.
whoever may be watching. So sometimes I think it can be a little bit difficult to discern what's actually the point of something that you might be listening to. So when it comes to any of your compositions, how do you project your storytelling and your worldview or your messages to the audience through the score, through the notation?
Well, sometimes I don't want it to be explicit. Sometimes I want it to be kind of interpretive, um, or maybe it's something I can't say, and the music is helping me kind of indirectly address something. But I mean, uh, I certainly try to write program notes
Right.
so that there's some kind of information there, and and I think that can be helpful if you have something that you really want people to understand about a piece of music or something to think about while they're listening. Um,
So some pieces should be open. Like there's nothing inherently lost if listeners don't immediately understand or grasp a piece of meaning.
sure. I mean, I think it's also like with art, any art, there's the intentions of the creator, but there's also the spin that you put on it as a viewer or listener. It might be very meaningful to somebody uh, to hear something that I maybe didn't think about very seriously, and vice versa.
Hmm.
Um, I think I just try to be honest about if I am writing a piece about some idea, I try to be explicit or have it available for those that are interested. But I think there's nothing wrong too with making music that's about um, maybe creating an experience for you to perform with your friends. Maybe it's you're writing a piece for a soloist, and it's really just about hanging out with the person that you like and listening to stuff that you like together and making something you think represent that person or make them feel well represented. And I think that's totally cool when it's more personal and not such like not like a lot of classical music. It's about some like really big important, you know,
Hmm.
thing. It has to be so heavy, and sometimes it's okay to just be making music
Right.
and joyfully for no reason.
Right. And I sometimes hear that people say the most important works of modern art are the types that interrogate social norms or
Mm.
societal contexts. Do you think this is true? Do you think modern works or even modern classical music or modern jazz, contemporary jazz music's role is to sort of interrogate or even disrupt these norms? Is that necessary for it to be an important work of art?
No, but I think, I think that one of the most powerful functions of art is to disrupt and critique society and so on. And I think it's something that a lot of us value about art and that we need as a society. So, I'm hesitant to say it is the most important thing or
Right.
some art is more important than other art, because obviously it's variable depending on the context and the person that's listening or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's hugely important to I don't know, uh, art as social commentary is baked into,
Right.
you know, art in our society. It's baked into jazz. It's baked into everything we do. I mean, in a way, just making art and making music is a commentary on society,
Right. Right. It's its own
making
thing.
space for that and celebrating that humanity that we
Exactly.
share.
Hmm. So, have you ever written a piece directly inspired by contemporary events?
Oh yeah, totally. I just finished a piece for a percussionist named David Wang. That's called. Um, it hasn't been um, released at all. So this is hot off the press. It's called Headlines,
Hmm.
and it's kind of about the news and um, about you know how we participate in um, protest in society and also about more specifically for me, it's about, my frustration with the federal government and what's going on right now with ICE and stuff like that and trying to make a piece that kind of captures my feelings about that and makes a space for other people to think about that and think about how they might um, engage with those ideas in a productive way. Um,
Right. Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I definitely think about that stuff. And, like um, like the piece I wrote recently for Akropolis Reed Quintet called "Are We Dreaming the Same Dream" is also kind of about um, making space for acknowledging people that aren't normally acknowledged in classical situations, just because of the history of classical music as like a kind of commercial label for selling records and things like that.
Right.
Like a lot of jazz composers and artists are kind of segregated from the classical
Hmm.
composers and artists because of the way records were sold at a time when artists were compensated very differently, let's say.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I think a lot about social commentary when I write music.
Okay. And that really affects the way you name your pieces, right?
Sometimes, yeah,
Hmm.
I
Okay.
think so.
So, what do you think of when you name these pieces? Because I know, in like when it comes to the classical music tradition, there's not really often names, but when it comes to jazz, the names are sometimes a lot more wild, more expressive. They might tell you more about the piece. So, first of all, I guess where do you get the inspiration for your names? And then second of all, do you think it would be useful for all types of music, all genres, to have these maybe more interesting names to the general consumer?
I know. I mean, I think everyone should do their own thing. In this time now, today, in the context in which I grew up, I was listening to the radio. I was listening to popular music.
Right,
Songs have names.
right.
You know,
Hmm.
when I don't know, uh, I don't know when Billie Eilish releases a song, she's not going to call it song number 17.
Right.
Um, it's kind of helpful to know that it's about a certain idea and I don't know, one thing I think about is that names have two functions, and one is to kind of tell about the piece, but another one is to just be an index so that people looking for that piece can find it and know that that's the right piece that they're looking for. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Uh-huh.
so I think about those things, but I still have, pieces like concerto for violin and percussion duo,
Hmm. Right.
where maybe the meaning is not in the title. Um,
Hmm.
but I thought it would be important to highlight the soloists and make it about what it is, a concerto. It's a concerto, so let's just call it that sometimes.
Right. Hmm. So do you think music written as a result of modern inspiration is inherently more relevant than the pieces that may sort of harken back to the older days and eras more, or do you think they're both equally relevant today?
I mean, what I don't really have an answer. I mean, I think all of this music is relevant and it's more relevant for some people than others. What's relevant to you?
Right, that's a good question. That's a good question.
And I think it changes all the time, like
Right.
I
Depends on what
yeah.
stage you are in your life as well.
Totally, totally. I think, for example, I think there was a long period where I was very not interested in classical music. I knew I wasn't ready to love it the way I needed to love it to really engage with it, and I just waited.
Hmm. Right.
And and after I listened to all the drum and bass music I wanted, and all of the odd time signature jazz, and
Hmm.
all the nerdy, British production stuff that I was into, and then I was like, oh, cool, the Jack Quartet. Oh, whoa, they did some really weird stuff that sounds kind of like these other things that I'm listening to. And, finding a way in to loving something, I think, I think if you're listening to music and it feels relevant to you, then you're doing something right. But
Right.
finding what that music is I think the hard part, especially today when there's just
Right.
so much stuff.
Right. Yeah, music is such a personal thing.
Um,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes going back in history is a great way to be able to dependably find something that's going to be good and meaningful because it's been vouched for by, so many people over time. I think it's a lot harder to find something in the present sometimes when there's all this noise
Hmm.
and it's still, all this music and all these events are being filtered through society and, you know, everyone's saying, I'm important, I'm important.
Right.
That's harder to find, I think, but
Hmm.
very special when you find it.
For sure. Well, focusing on the topic of importance, I think a Grammy is pretty important. So I'd love to focus briefly on Strands, the work that won you the 2025 Grammy for the Best Instrumental Composition. So, for starters, what was the intention behind Strands? What sort of message were you trying to convey?
Yeah, well, it's a movement of a larger piece called "Are We Dreaming the Same Dream?" And um, it inspired by a lot of ideas, but it was basically about me coming to terms with my identity as an artist, as an American artist, which
Hmm.
is a complicated word, especially today with what does it mean to be an American, which is complicated, right?
Hmm.
But also, as I was saying earlier, American music means very different things to a classical audience and a jazz audience, for example. And being somebody that works in both communities, I felt a lot of conflict, in terms of like, oh, is this, some people think about Copland and Bernstein, and some people are thinking about Mingus and jazz as, and Louis Armstrong, who's more American than Louis Armstrong,
Yeah.
so. Um, just in a very broad way, I was thinking, this is complicated. Why are we in this situation still today? And what can I do about it? And I found this great Ralph Ellison quote at the end of Invisible Man, where he talks about how he talks about American identity. It's a theme throughout the book, but there's this kind of tendency to think of American culture as a soup,
Hmm.
as Wynton Marsalis would say, like a gumbo, where it's all these things mixed together, all these cultures mixed together into this oneness.
Hmm.
But what I really liked about Ralph Ellison is that he talked about how America is woven of many strands and we have to recognize them. And the way I interpreted that is like it's good to recognize the individual strands because things get lost when you kind of squish everything together into a unified identity. Um, and so the piece for me became about representing important influences on my own artistic identity as an American composer, specifically the artists Jerry Allen, Charles Mingus, Leonard Bernstein, and Dave Brubeck.
Right.
And they were all people that represented American culture in their own music, and also kind of, I don't know, there were forms of protest in their music and political engagement and things like that. And I just thought um, I'd like to I'd like to address this in this way. So that's kind of where it came from. And Strands is a reference to this Ralph Ellison quote, and also to a quote from a great choreographer named Bill T. Jones,
Hmm.
who inspired the work as well when he talked about his relationship with John Cage, and saying that sometimes we have to accept conflict in order to become the artists we truly are.
Hmm. Right.
And so just sitting in that space, in the space of conflict, I think is okay. And I feel like he uh, gave me permission to do that in a way.
Hmm. So it was a good exercise in sort of dissecting your own musical identity.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. That's
Hmm.
what it was.
So besides that, did you also learn new things about your own artistry, or was it mainly an exploration to the past, sort of?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I mean, yes and yes. I think every time we create something, we're learning about ourselves.
Hmm.
Um, and and certainly, it was a way for me to. I often think of myself as I'm like looking at myself and analyzing my behavior and being like, Pascal seems happy today, or Pascal seems like something's wrong, I- and and I think it's the same with the music when we create music, where we make decisions and we can kind of have these different layers to the way we're, looking at the music and ourselves making the music and what the music is doing. And so I got a lot of perspective on myself, I think. um, Especially too I'm really interested in how ensembles work when members of the ensembles are coming from different musical traditions.
Hmm.
So in this case, it was really fun to work with Akropolis Reed Quintet, where they're kind of a classical
Yeah.
ensemble, and drummer Christian Euman, who's a jazz drummer,
Hmm.
who's well known for playing with Jacob Collier and Billy Childs and a
Yeah.
number of people, but finding ways to kind of welcome them both into the music, um, and allow them to really be who they are without having to compromise their,
Hmm.
artistic language
Right.
to fit one tradition or another.
Hmm.
And I think that was a great learning experience for me, to just discover some things.
Yeah.
Um, it was also fun for me to try some rhythmic experiments because I was writing my dissertation at the same time, and and which is about rhythm and meter and irregularity.
Hmm.
So it was kind of a great way to try those ideas.
Right. Right. And so I'm interested. Do you think there was something distinctly different about Strand as compared to other works you've composed, or was it more same and maybe there was an element of chance as well in winning the Grammy?
Oh, well, yes, and yes to that as well. I mean, I think it certainly was the first work I ever wrote for Reed Quintet, which is an unusual ensemble.
Right.
Um, um, and I think, with the Grammys, it's kind of not something you can really count on.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a
Yeah.
lot of luck involved, and I was very, very lucky to be in that room with those people, and I'm grateful for the support of my peers.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, there's a lot of great music that comes out every year that doesn't get Grammys. So
Right.
I just feel like there's some randomness, and I was lucky to be the person that benefited from it this past year.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, now I think I'd like to switch a little bit more to the compositional process itself.
Hmm.
So, when it comes to actually sitting down and writing a piece of music, blank sheet of paper or
Hmm.
notation staff or whatever it may be, do you begin with a clear conceptual idea, or do you more sort of experiment and workshop the narrative as you go?
I think I begin with the people involved in a piece. So usually, when I'm writing a piece of music, I'm writing for a person.
Hmm.
So like, if I was writing you a piece, Chaos, I would say like, what are you listening to right now? Let's go. What are you listening to right now, Chaos?
Let's say, how about EDM?
EDM. Okay, cool. Um, and what what do you when you think about like solo violin music, like what's some of your favorite rep to
Sibelius
play like that
Concerto.
would represent
Yeah,
you, you know?
I think the Sibelius Concerto, the Korngold Concerto,
Oh yeah.
more romantic pieces.
Yeah, cool. So I think, like one thing could be fun to do would be to talk about, oh, and let's talk about EDM artists too. Like, you know, I know with these genres it can be hard to remember the individual artist names, but do you have some favorites?
Daft Punk, maybe?
Daft Punk, awesome. Yeah, okay. So let's say, I'm learning about you. I'm learning about like how you want to be represented as a performer, but also like what you listen to for fun. I think I might be maybe would want to help bridge the gap between Daft Punk and Korngold, you know, which is like fun for me to think of these very different kind of musical languages and then say like, you know, how can we turn the violin into a drum set? Um, do you want to work with electronics? Maybe we could get a vocoder involved. What would happen if you played some beautiful melodic stuff and and it sounded like these big lush chords through a piece of electronic equipment,
Right.
kind of like what Imogen Heap does on Hide
Yeah.
and Seek,
Yeah. Yeah.
or what Daft Punk does on Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger.
Hmm.
Um, you know, and I maybe would make a bunch of sketches for you that kind of explore turning the violin into a Daft Punk thing, or what would happen if, Korngold was writing EDM or something like that. It'd just be fun to think about those things and then see what sounds good, see what works.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I
and
think
then
that's.
I'd probably want to ask you, like, what do you like from this
Yeah.
collection of shiny objects?
Hmm.
And then I'd maybe try to craft something from that as a starting point. And that gives me like my themes and my materials and also like a window into your life. And then I get to think about you while I'm writing it. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. So it's a
Um,
really deeply collaborative process.
I like it when it's like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Not
that's
all
good.
composers are like that though. Sometimes
Hmm.
they're exploring something and the performer's a vessel,
Right.
which is cool.
Hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. I like it when it's collaborative.
Hmm. Right. And so you suggested before that the score and the performance aren't necessarily the end point of composing a piece. So if that's the case, what is the end point? And where for you does a piece feel like it's complete? Does it ever feel like it's complete?
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was a kid and I liked drawing pictures. There's a feeling you get when you're a 4-year-old and you draw a train and you're like, I'm done. I drew the train. There it is. Let's put it on the refrigerator.
Hmm.
That's a good feeling to kind of finish the thing. And um, for me, what makes something feel really finished, depending on the piece,
Hmm.
is often, making a recording or making a music video or both. Usually they're kind of connected.
Right.
So So there are pieces that I will write sometimes where I'll compose the music with a visual element in mind.
Hmm.
And, in that case, I'm thinking about a music video at the same time. And finishing a piece is, we got the score, but then there's also recording the ensemble or the musicians. And maybe if it's a concept video, expressing that concept and working with a videographer to capture like some idea and then editing everything.
Mm.
And it's not always a linear process, like the way I just mentioned it.
Right.
I find often, um, like for example, there's a string quartet I just wrote for the Afiara Quartet,
Hmm.
and after I wrote it, and they recorded it, we're mixing, we're looking at all the files, and I'm thinking, oh, I could just take this chord out. Maybe I can restructure this. Maybe I can take this little segment and turn it into a longer section.
Hmm.
Um, and I like that kind of changing modes.
The iterative
Yeah, just
thing.
back and forth through the process instead of it being like, you know, compose the score, play the score, record the thing. And, because a lot of the time when you record a piece of music, it sounds different than you may have imagined it, and there may be creative opportunities
Yeah.
that you didn't realize, and maybe it would change depending on the performer.
Hmm.
Maybe that performer did that thing, super well because it's their specialty or something, and so I love changing the composition in the audio and then reflecting that change in the score, and it involves a lot of back and forth, but um, I find um, I find that really rewarding.
Right.
And I think it feels finished when like all the stuff is out there in the world
Yeah.
and you're done correcting
Done in
it
it.
and
Right.
you know
Right. Is there a certain part of the process you find the most draining?
oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's hard work.
Yeah.
I feel like I compose like 4% of the time and the other 96% of the time I'm like answering emails and copying
Yeah.
hard drives. I'm like trying to get my music software to work because the bassoon samples aren't loading, or I need to like you know make parts or get a copyist involved. I have to email people and deal with the invoices and get like there's so much extra stuff that you have to do, um, and that can be exhausting, especially if it's like mind-numbing work like
Oh yeah.
uh,
Uh-huh.
I don't know. But I feel like when that goal is in view, it all feels easier because it's serving some purpose. It doesn't really feel like separate.
Right. Okay.
Um,
Yeah, makes
but
sense.
but yeah, that stuff's hard. It's hard work, and I
Oh
feel
yeah, I
like you have to
bet.
care about what you're doing in order to do that stuff.
Right. Each step of the process all coming
Yeah.
together. Yeah. So I would love to conclude our last segment of this interview with some forward-looking questions
Okay.
regarding tech and the classical music industry.
Okay, let's go.
All right. So I think many, or at least more, classical musicians are experimenting with technology nowadays. So do you see this experimentation with technology as necessary for the future of classical music, or do you think it's just one possible path?
I mean, I think you know, I'm I'm hesitant to say anything is necessary,
Right, right.
um, but I think that if Beethoven was alive today, he would be checking it
Love
out.
it.
And he'd
Yeah,
probably be on the cutting edge, because he was on the cutting edge when he was doing
right.
stuff. He was, piano was the big technology and he was doing it. Um, and I think even if you're not engaging with technology,
Hmm.
the latest thing, or whatever AI is doing, I think just being aware of it
Hmm.
is important.
Right.
Paying attention to what's going on in the world is going to make your art better because you're paying attention because you can relate to the present in a way. And I feel like um yeah, we can serve classical music and we can serve that tradition and that history through that awareness of the present and constantly kind of assessing how do we fit these things together? How do we um, um, take all the things we love about music and make them a part of modern society
Right.
instead of, selling them to Amazon and, you know,
Right.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I think interesting stuff is happening.
Hmm.
Video game music's getting really interesting,
Oh yeah.
especially with all this interactive
Right.
stuff where you can maybe compose a piece of music and then it changes depending on how you play the game.
Hmm.
The way music is spatialized is getting really interesting, where it's not just a left speaker and a right speaker and it's the same relationship. I feel like that's changing.
Hmm.
Um, surround sound, all that stuff is
Yeah.
very, very
Yeah.
interesting.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah. I think some of the AI created music is still not I don't know. I'm not there yet. I'm
Yeah,
not feeling it.
yeah,
It is happening as deeply as you know,
hmm
at least for classical music performance. Um,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've heard of like completely AI generated bands on Spotify, and
yeah,
I'm actually putting out massive numbers, and really interesting just to see that people sometimes maybe they just don't care, or maybe they just can't differentiate. And I mean, it's crazy how rapid the progress of AI in the music industry in general just has been.
yeah, it is. I mean, I think what's tricky is that a lot of people are ready to kind of capitalize
Hmm
on our humanity.
Yeah.
Um, and and I think there are still people that are engaging with these technologies in really beautiful ways too. It's how
hmm
you use it. It's not like the technology. Um, but I think what's really interesting is I think it's making us think about how we value art and music, especially when it's something that's more expressive, um, and human oriented. Like
hmm
I don't know. I think that um, going out and seeing somebody actually perform without auto tune,
Yeah.
something that is increasingly of value
hmm
today. I think just because that experience, that seeing a human being actually do that, you know, or play a beautiful corn gold violin piece or something, you know, that's really special, and that's not going anywhere. And
Right.
you know, without a screen, I don't know how we're gonna um,
hmm hmm
recreate that in a way that's effective.
Right.
Because I think the reason why we're moved by music is because of this kind of humanity
Human.
or some imaginative quality or something that we connect to the world and
hmm
to other people.
Right. So when it comes to using AI in the music making process, is there a point for you when it crosses from in something intrinsically human still to something artificial, maybe?
Yeah, I think it depends on how you're using it. I could see how like it would be neat to try a bunch of, prompts and see what comes out and maybe mix something together, um, or to have like a sandbox where you're trying things out, but still imagining a version that is, maybe real people or something. I think that conversation is actually really interesting, and I think there's a lot we can do with technology and with AI to kind of advance what we're doing.
Right,
But
right.
I think keeping track of the differences between like advancing what we're doing and connecting with people versus, I don't know, watching a fake 92-year-old on Instagram telling us life advice when it ends up being like an AI generated video
hmm
made by like a 20-year-old, like that's the kind of stuff where I'm like, what is the value of this?
Right.
You know, Even if it says it's AI, it's kind of like, why do we want to watch this? And on some level, I feel like we have to protect ourselves from companies that want to just take advantage of our like human,
hmm
organic meat brains, and our
Yeah.
helplessness,
hmm
and I feel like we need to develop new muscles to be able to fight that and
Right.
within ourselves, not necessarily like
Yeah.
I'm not anti-technology by any means, but I do think that we need to develop new skills to be able to deal with, um,
Mhm.
I don't know, the persuasiveness and power of these new technologies and how they're used, and the companies wielding these powers,
So do you
which are not,
think,
yeah.
yeah, so do you think that there is a danger in over associating music with technology, or do you think over time it's just something that we'll become more acclimated to and less sensitive to? Or
I
maybe
mean,
that is one of the
yeah.
dangers.
I think there are dangers depending on like what's the context. I mean, what's the technology? What's the situation? It's
Right,
all
right.
going to be so specific and different. I think, actually, I think one of the dangers is overgeneralizing about these
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
because it really, every person's different, every company is different, every application of a technology is different.
Right.
And I think, you know, like with the gumbo analogy,
Hmm.
keeping the strands separate and acknowledging the different situations. I think that nuance is, I think, what's going to really help us move forward gracefully.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
you know,
Definitely. So, Empty Promise was one of your compositions, and it
hmm.
was sort of highlighting the human emotional dependence on technology.
Yeah.
So, how can we regulate this dependence? Maybe, especially when it comes to classical music, is it necessary to do so, or is it just something that we have to adjust to?
Yeah, I think like I was saying earlier,
Yeah.
I think we should just pay attention to what's going on and how classical music is interfacing with technology. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and I think depending on the person, there are people that are going to be successful by ignoring that stuff or by addressing it, and it's really like what box are you in?
Right, right,
And I think we're going to be okay as long as we're authentic about it.
right. Definitely. Let's keep what is authentic about music, and it should be okay for the most part.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Well, Pascal, thank you so much for joining us today for the interview. It was
Thank you, Chaos.
such a pleasure to learn from you and all this new information that you've imparted on me, all your wisdom. So,
Oh, I'm learning from talking to you as well.
thank you. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, of your week.
Thank you. I hope you do too.